In 1773, the British diplomat George Macartney described the British Empire as a vast empire on which the sun never sets, and whose bounds nature has not yet ascertained. Welcome to A Simple Question, your weekly roundup of news and views from the streets of London. I'm Ed Augustin. On today's show, we ask the public what they think of Britain's colonial past.
Despite reaching its peak of influence in the beginning of the 20th century, the British Empire's origins reach back to the end of the 1400s. Following Portugal and Spain's lead in overseas explorations in the 15th century, King Henry VII of England began to commission voyages across the Atlantic. What began as 13 trading colonies in America in the early 1700s soon spread into Asia and Africa by the late 1800s. And from this era onwards, the empire continued to expand rapidly. By 1922, the British Empire held sway over 500 million people, 1/4 of the world's population at the time, and covered almost 1/4 of the Earth's total land area. However, the legacy of this empire remains questionable. Many have called on Britain to apologise for its colonial past, mainly for Britain's establishment and maintenance of the African slave trade, in which an estimated 60 million Africans were shipped in appalling conditions to the Americas and sold into slavery. The historian Walter Rodney argues that the export of such a huge number of people was a demographic tragedy which left Africa permanently disadvantaged. This demographic disaster, according to Rodney, largely explains the continent's continued poverty today.
This is a very special day. 200 years ago.
In a statement marking the 200th anniversary on the abolishment of the slave trade in Britain, the former Prime Minister Tony Blair expressed deep regret for this imperial transgression.
It's an opportunity also for the United Kingdom to express our deep sorrow and regret for our nation's role in the slave trade and for the unbearable suffering, individually and collectively, that it caused. But it presents us too with the chance to remember the lives of the millions who passed through the fort, and many like it, never to see their homeland or families again, and to pay tribute also to the courage and conviction of those who campaigned to end this vile trade.
But Mr. Blair stopped short of issuing a full apology, and what activists said was an attempt to stave off demands for reparations. Many campaigners are still demanding that Britain issues a formal apology and compensates its former colonies for the economic, social and demographic damages they witnessed under British rule.
A Simple Question is the weekly show where we hit the streets to find out what the public are thinking. We were out and about this week and we started with an easy question. How many former British colonies can you name? How many former British colonies can you name?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Jeez, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Malaya, I suppose Australia was a colony originally, Canada, New Zealand, Fiji, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, India, Pakistan.
Former British colonies? Oh, I could name several. The Gambia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Canada, Australia.
Falkland Islands, Ascension Island, Windward Islands, Gibraltar, Malta, Palestine at one time, Cyprus, Aden.
Rhodesia, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, no more.
India, Pakistan, a lot of African countries, several in the Caribbean.
How many British colonies can you name?
Oh, the colonies? Oh, I think former British colonies. Oh, Hong Kong, South Africa, Canada, and Antigua.
You had India was a colony, Hong Kong was one there, they had one Nigeria, Jamaica, Bermuda also. The list goes on, but it was a lot of them, yes.
What are your views on the British Empire's history?
Well, quite honestly, I mean, I'm a product of it myself because I'm South African. My family got out there for the Boer War. But if you look at it, I think that a lot of evil was done to a lot of people, and then they cover it up by saying that it's, trying to, bring God to the masses and all that. But actually, all they wanted the money, didn't they, really? And so I think it's not a wonderful thing at all.
Probably in its time, it did good for some people and did bad for others.
What are your views on the history of the British Empire?
Mixed. I think obviously at the point in time we had an empire, maybe we felt we were doing the right thing, but I guess if you look back on history, perhaps that wasn't always the case.
I have very mixed views about the history of the British Empire. I think the colonial period did a huge amount of harm in terms of breaking up social structures, particularly in developing countries, imposing particular systems, administrative systems, legal systems, and etc., which weren't necessarily applicable to those particular countries.
At the time, I think it seemed like a good idea. Looking back, maybe not so good.
What are your views about the history of the British Empire?
We based it on the Romans, who of course were very successful. We weren't fools. And like the Romans, we were very good colonisers. The people in Africa were far better off under our rule than they've ever been under their own.
I think that we benefit from it, from the British Empire today. We benefit from the power, but it's obviously we've got a lot to answer for in terms of the troubles we've caused in the Middle East, between India and Pakistan and all that sort of thing.
It's very mixed. It was good and bad. Lots of bad things were done in the name of Britain, and maybe benefits were brought to people, and it was probably laid the foundations for the modern world.
What they did to people in those countries, it's not, a lot of it was quite negative.
Well, you've heard what the British public had to say about the empire. Now it's time to go to this week's experts to hear their perspective.
The English king in the 17th century, Charles II, acquired Bombay, or what is now Mumbai, as part of his dowry when he married a Portuguese princess. Some of it was very fertile parts of the Caribbean, wonderful for growing sugar. Sugar was a very highly valued commodity in Britain in the 17th and 18th centuries. Malaysia, rubber, fueling the boom in rubber in industry in the 19th century. Once India had been conquered and colonised, then much of the rest was important trade links to India. So when the Suez Canal opened in the 1860s, Egypt became an important link to India. Mauritius was a useful port on the way to India. South Africa was a useful port on the way to India. So a kind of a vast range of aims or motivations behind acquiring this huge agglomeration of space. I guess beginning of the 20th century, it started unravelling. Australia became an independent part of the Commonwealth, very beginning of the 20th century. Egypt started acquiring degrees of independence from the 1920s onwards. But the big set piece, of course, was the independence of India, British India, in 1947, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Burma as well. And then 1970s, 1980s, parts of the Gulf and the Caribbean countries, and of course the wind of change that swept across Africa in the late 1950s, 1957, Ghana, also much of French Africa and some of the Portuguese colonies in the 1970s. And then I guess the last big colony became independent, 1997, Hong Kong. There are a few little bits still remaining, Gibraltar, Falkland Islands, Bermuda, but 1997 was sort of marked the end of this exploit.
People came along and said, we are white men, we've never seen white men before, we were excited. But it amounted to Britain acquiring, that's why we talk about the sun that will never set, because it was an excitement. They here didn't know what that was, and they could see this vast empire, vast people, colonies of people that they can't fight us back, because we are superior people, we are superior race. We discovered them, and they took us over. We imprinted and fought the war and subdued. We brought our missionaries in with us. They changed the spirituality of the people. They removed humanity from them. We made them, we acquired them. And this was what actually, we can kill them. We can actually use them to kill themselves, to subdue them. And this was their empire. And 35 colonies were involved in all of this. And because of that, the people were deprived of humanity. They were deprived of the people, even the ownership of themselves.
In 2008, Italy committed to paying $5 billion to Libya as reparations for its colonial past. Should Britain be doing the same with its old colonies? Here's what the public said. Do you think Britain should pay reparations for the damage it caused in its colonial countries?
Well, I think that they have a responsibility. They've got responsibilities. I mean, how much they pay, I'm not too sure about that. But they have responsibilities to, the troubles they've caused in the other parts of the world, for sure. They have responsibility. But as far as figures concerned, I couldn't tell you.
But do you think they should pay?
Well, they should definitely pay. Not so much hand over money, but help people.
No, but I don't think that particularly, but I do think that Britain should demonstrate that it has a particular responsibility for its ex-colonial colonies, and not least through giving aid to those particular countries.
In 2008, Italy paid Libya $5 billion as compensation for its colonial rule. Do you think Britain should do the same to its ex-colonies?
I wouldn't think so, but I have to say I'm not quite sure on what basis the Italians may have compensated the Libyans. I think we probably would come out having had a positive influence, and I'm not sure we'd want to compensate.
Because it happened in the past. It's nothing. It's not the current people. It's not people of today who created the problems. I mean, where do you stop?